All right. A little late, but that's all right. Uh, well, let's just keep going. Objective of this presentation is to overview what OSINT is, explore its direct and powerful relevancy to web developers of all kinds, and give you some actionable takeaways, including where you can find more information on how to develop these skills. Oh, and I should say before even getting started that there are basically uh, no barriers to entry. There's if there's a cost for something, it's because it's an expert tool that isn't free and open source software. So it's very easy to get involved with OSINT as an individual, but as a web developer, it's super powerful. All right, let's go. Agenda. What is OSINT? Why is OSINT important for web developers to learn? Some tools, techniques, including web scraping, APIs, social media monitoring, other uses of OSINT by web developers, and then some ethical considerations, and then the additional resources at the very end. So let's dive right into this right now. What is OSINT? And this is a little bit more detailed description of what OSINT is from the introduction. Definition of open source intelligence is the process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting publicly freely available information from various sources. And then any source on the internet that you can imagine is technically fair game when it comes to open source intelligence, as long as it's publicly facing and there's not a paywall between you and it. It is generally considered fair game for open source intelligence. There are many kinds of open source intelligence, such as website based, just dissecting a website's performance and finding out where the servers are hosted or what country the servers are located in. Social media OSINT, using tools such as like Hootsuite or TweetDeck or any of the other numerous analysis tools available on the internet for social media monitoring. Geospatial OSINT, media OSINT, and public records or public record OSINT. These are all different flavors of OSINT. And if the core definition of OSINT is just accessing publicly available information, you can imagine that this list could go on for quite some time. Sources of OSINT related information, generally speaking, are like websites, forums, and databases. Activity on platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Maps, satellite imagery, and geolocation metadata from photos, government databases, court records, and other public documents. So there's no end to the kinds and the volume of information. Believe that's a very important point, and I'll make that later on. The volume of information that you have access to is someone who practices OSINT is almost beyond comprehension at this point for anyone. There's so much of it. That's why it's good to know about filters and what you're looking for. Okay, why is OSINT important for web developers to learn? Enhancing security. These are 4 reasons why you might consider learning OSINT as a web developer. There are many more reasons, but these are 4 of the major reasons, in my opinion. Enhancing application security or enhancing security measures, spotting potential vulnerabilities and threats to one's apps and networks from publicly available data. This can include learning about a JavaScript library that's no longer supported by its creator or its developer, its core development team. Bugs, insecure configurations. Another one might be understanding user behavior and expectations. Publicly available data can give insights into how users interact with similar kinds of websites and applications as that would interact with yours. So you can understand, you can deduce with web developer tools how users use similar apps as something of your own creation or something that you're interested in analyzing. Competitive analysis, identifying competitors, understanding technologies being used. That's a big advantage, in my opinion, for web developers. Dissecting features and better understanding one's own content strategy. And then a very, very powerful one for web developers is personal branding and online reputation management. Just simply opening a private browsing tab or browser screen, searching for your name on Google and keeping up to date with how your brand, how your professional reputation is being presented on the internet. Very powerful and very useful. All right. OSINT tools and techniques. These are some general basic OSINT tools and techniques that web developers, especially those who are familiar with JavaScript and Python, can apply immediately. Web scraping, and I will get into some of the specific tools that you can use towards the end of this presentation for web scraping that are legally available, totally legitimate. Extracting information from websites, often accomplished with Python or JavaScript. APIs, though we'll get into APIs in just a little bit, but APIs and web scraping together are two, in my opinion, of the most powerful tools a web developer can know how to use. And then to apply them for OSINT, you can download a database very quickly with an API, etc. Social media monitoring tools like TweetDeck, Hootsuite for monitoring activity on social media platforms. These are basically just interfaces over APIs, whether they're native or they're brought in from an external provider. Search engines, there are specialized search engines such as the Wayback Machine. You can use Google Dorks, you can use DuckDuckGo, and there are many more esoteric search engines that you can gain access to do a deep dive on particular subjects and find out as much about an interesting point or point of interest as is possible. And then public records, accessing a nation's, counties, states, or municipalities' publicly available data and records often results in access to more information than one knows what to do with. That is a general rule of thumb in my understanding. Now let's get into like some specifics of web scraping, some specific tools that you can use as a web developer for conducting OSINT. Including the library names and languages that you would need to be familiar with. So in regards to web scraping, this refers to the extraction of data and content from websites. Ultimately, it simulates the visiting of a website by a bot or a spider that is constructed using the Python or JavaScript or some sort of specialized software, the Python or JavaScript programming languages, or some specialized software that allows a visit to a website to be simulated, and then given the criteria of your programming to basically copy all of the media, all of the content, all of the HTML, often based on your HTML parameters, bring that back with them to you, and do that over and over and over on sometimes let's just throw a number out there and say 100 websites 10 times a day might be an individual who's doing this. At a much larger scale, it's millions of websites every day kind of thing. So web scraping is very powerful. It is something we will talk about ethical considerations at the very end of this presentation, things to take into consideration for engaging with web scraping, because it is controversial in some circles. But if you are to do it, you can use Python. Beautiful Soup is probably the most well-known and the easiest to learn, because there is an abundance of tutorials on Beautiful Soup. It's a Python library, such as well as Scraping, Selenium, JavaScript libraries, including Puppeteer and Cheerio, or you could use pre-existing software. There might be a fee associated with it, such as Octoparse or import.io. All right. Now, API, in my opinion, if you were to go any route for scale, APIs. You might consider APIs as your primary bet, because it's working with the company, it's working with the database owner, it's cooperative OSINT, in my opinion, and that's much more ethical in general. It's not as aggressive, and you might not get in trouble by downloading things you shouldn't have access to. With an API, you're typically given access to the resources that you subscribe to, or that you're being allowed to access at any given interval. Now, definition and usage of APIs. APIs are a set of rules that allow one software application to interact with another. APIs can be used to gather data from social media platforms, search engines, databases, and countless other online resources. And ultimately, what I would like to say is that API skills are highly valuable for the web developer to have already anyways. But if you're looking for a way to become familiar with APIs, using especially JavaScript, you can you can create or find an OSINT project that needs an API developer to write fetch calls for downloading information. That is, APIs are in my opinion the way to go for large scale data transfer or manipulation. Popular APIs for OSINT include the Facebook Graph API, custom Google Search Engine API, and Amazon Product Advertising API. The Amazon Product Advertising API is the most interesting out of those three, in my opinion. You can find a lot of information about the relationships between different kinds of products, and that gives you a lot of insight into how Amazon actually as a platform works. Let's move on. Social media monitoring. This is probably the easiest of the tools mentioned, but it is perhaps the easiest, but it is the most time exhausting, or most time requires the most time to conduct, especially when you're doing it manually. Tools for social media monitoring include applications on native platforms, just like TweetDeck, or which is a subdomain and now a premium feature. Using the built-in search and monitoring features on platforms such as LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook is very common. I would say probably more commonly are third-party platforms that integrate with social media platforms via cooperative access to their APIs, such as Hootsuite, Brandwatch, and Mention. There are many larger. There are significantly larger services than Hootsuite, but their cost goes through the roof, and they only typically are offered to corporate clients, frankly. But these tools and building your own custom software, which is totally doable, I encourage you to look into building your own OSINT software, especially if it's working with APIs. You can learn a lot about programming, and one of my own projects is something that I use every day for OSINT, and it's changed the way that I find new and timely information. OSINT is very powerful for the web developer. Now, why social media monitoring is important is you can identify not only tech trends, but trends in general. And if you're a content creator if you're a marketer as a web developer, identifying trends early and seeing the hallmark call signs of something that is going to take off before anyone else does is totally doable with social media monitoring, with your own software at that, especially with third-party tools. So that's a big one. Security vulnerability assessments and alerts. You can set up alerts on certain platforms for keywords to be delivered to your email. That's very useful for security analysis. Building data-driven applications using APIs. You are able to learn how to do that, and you are able to basically take your feed off of the fire hose that is the activity of these platforms, and you're able to better understand or enhance user experience and user interfaces based on user behavior from improved feedback. Let's jump to the next one. Other uses of or for OSINT by web developers. I mentioned at the very beginning of this quick little presentation that browser developer tools, those are probably, if there was nothing other than your browser, if there was no other tool than your browser that you're using for OSINT, you are still on the cutting edge, especially as a web developer, because your browser developer tools allow you to dissect a website as deeply as really I know how to, besides going to exotic third-party service providers. But native browser developer tools allow you to see the network activity, allow you to see the files that are downloaded, the local storage, the session storage, the HTML, etc. And I don't need to speak to this to anyone who knows what I'm referring to, but that is what I would encourage you to try from an OSINT perspective. Go to a website that you're interested in learning more about, open up your browser developer tools, and look at it perform with the network analysis. Do I believe it's called Lighthouse analysis with Chrome on the website to understand how it performs. Just dissect it with these tools, and you will learn a lot for yourself about your own trade, let alone for your own interests. Browser plugins and add-ons. Plugins, I believe, for Chrome, and add-ons for Firefox. dozens of useful, often security-related applications, such as Privacy Badger, uBlock Origin, and many, many others. Um, those are useful for OPSEC, especially security-related, operational security. For the OSINT investigator, for the OSINT practitioner, having some security in place is very relevant, although it's not exclusively defensive. It can be offensive too. Maybe we'll talk about that more in another presentation or during our discussion. Viewing non-editable HTML source code for a given web page, that is just on a Windows, and as far as I'm familiar, on a Linux machine, Control U, going to a web page, pressing, making sure it's a focus, hitting Control U should open a new tab with the raw non-editable HTML source code for that page, and that gives you very very fine detail as to what you're looking at, and gives you a whole list of opportunities to learn more about how a website operates, including the services that are relied on. And I will say that that is a strategy that I've used to help me gain employment by dissecting a potential employer's website at that level, and then surprising them with services they weren't even familiar with that they were using. So you can use it as a web developer at any stage, at any position, whether you're employed, looking for a job, or just curious. Content trends for media makers, using tools such as Google Trends, which now incorporates YouTube search result activity, Google shopping or e-commerce, and other platforms within the Google paradigm or Google Index are available to show relative volumes of interest over time. And that's a tool to help you develop a sixth sense for content trend location or discovery. Now let's talk about some ethical considerations. It is important, in my opinion, to consider the ethics of what you're doing. You might disagree, who's ever hearing the sound of my voice might disagree, but when it comes to ethical considerations, legal aspects of using publicly accessible data, such as copyright laws and international data storage laws, especially if you're transferring data across platform or across country borders, internationally, very important that you understand. For instance, in the EU, the European Union, very different laws than in the United States. Or just a general respect for privacy, determining what is exactly public, what is not public, what is private data, such as the indexing settings on a social media platform or forum. Does it want to be indexed? Do the owners of this website want the content indexed in any way? And respecting those kinds of true false statements. Personal information, be very cautious when handling and storing, especially sensitive or personally identifiable information for yourself, of course, but for anyone ever, really. And these are my opinions. I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm just saying these are things you might want to consider. In conclusion, what is OSINT? Open source intelligence refers to the collection and analysis of publicly available information. It is, in my opinion, hyper relevant for web developers across the practice of being a web developer, from enhancing security measures, competitive and content analyses, personal branding, and online reputation management, and much, much more. There is really no limit to how you can use OSINT where it's relevant. It's just finding information that is rarely found is the advantage that it gives you. And it gives the web developer a surprisingly powerful and relatively rare professional edge, for sure. If you're thinking in the OSINT paradigm, it gives you, and using OSINT tools or tools in an OSINT way, it gives you a distinct advantage, because most people aren't even aware that OSINT is an option. Diverse OSINT tools and techniques. There are no limit to the kinds of tools that can be used, especially if you're the one who's making them. And there are ethical considerations to make. I'm going to give you the resources for finding out more in the next slide, I believe. But we've gone over these ethical considerations. Just basically be aware of the laws and be respectful of privacy. Those are the two key mantras there. Now, these are the additional resources. Very simple. There are many more additional resources. And if you would like We can talk about those, and I can share the links during our group conversation to another dozen websites and another half a dozen books. But if I was to give you three resources that are books to dive deeper with, it is Deep Dive by Ray L. Baker. That's a brand new book. It's a very good quality book. And then another author who's written two books, Michael Bazell, OSINT Techniques, Resources for Uncovering Online Information. And then the OPSEC Extreme Opposite, or the extreme opposite, which is extreme privacy, what it takes to disappear. How do people like celebrities or CEOs or national leaders, how do they disappear from the public's eye forever? And that's what that book by someone who does that professionally is all about, which is why I recommend both his books. Then you have two other books that you can look at and find more information about. Social Engineering by Christopher Had-Nagy is a good book. It's one of the only books of its kind I've come across. And Adversarial Tradecraft and Cybersecurity is more of a technical book about human hacking and cyber hacking. Websites, you can go to the website right here of any of these four that I've listed. Privacytools.io is basically, you could say, a consumer-based or consumer-level privacy tools for individual computer use. You might also want to find out more about OSINT tools, or OSINT framework is probably the most interesting. So osintframework.com, very interesting. Interface for finding out more about the different tools that you can use for OSINT work. Very cool, actually. And that is all I have. So I'm going to stop recording.